Hello, everyone. We would like to start the JIIA and CNAS webinar on cybersecurity in the Indo-Pacific. I am from JIIA. My name is Kotani. The issue of cybersecurity has grown from a level of crime to a level of national security, affecting issues that affect national security. Also, North Korea, through cyber crime, has gained funds to promote its missile program. So it's become an international issue. Also, in the information space, the use of deep AI and deep fake in order to disseminate disinformation and misinformation is growing. Today, JIIA and CNAS held a closed-door private roundtable to discuss these issues in depth. And from here onwards, we would like to share parts of that discussion with you, participants of this webinar. Now then, we would like to call upon Mr. Vivek Chilkuri to moderate the session, please.
Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. My name is Vivek Chilkuri. I'm a senior fellow and program director of the Technology and National Security Program at CNAS, bipartisan national security think tank in Washington, D.C. I want to thank all of our distinguished speakers and for everybody attending in person and for all of our participants online who are joining us virtually. I wanted to start by thanking our hosts at the Japan Institute for International Affairs and Chief Executive Director Yoshida-san and Kotani-san for his remarks, and the staff at JIIA for all of the tremendous work they've done behind the scenes in the many days leading up to this and during the actual morning session to make the event run as smoothly as it has. I wanted to start with just a little bit of context about why we're here and why CNAS and JIIA have partnered on this particular project. We actually at CNAS began a project on cybersecurity in the Indo-Pacific last December. And the reason we did that was because it was a moment of aspiration in Washington and capitals around the region to deepen ties, but also the reality of uneven cybersecurity practices, both in our government, but also governments and private sectors across the region that are inhibiting our ability to deepen those ties and realize the promise of greater economic, military, and intelligence cooperation. And all of this happening against the backdrop of a rapidly evolving and an arguably more dangerous cybersecurity landscape, whether it's China moving into a more aggressive posture, which I hope we can talk about later, Russia's ongoing cyber aggression, which is not in this particular theater, but we know everyone is paying attention to what they're doing in Ukraine in the cyber domain, and obviously the advent of tools like generative AI, which are raising interesting questions about how it's going to affect cyber offense versus cyber defense. So all of these things came together and, in our view, demanded a timely, urgent conversation about opportunities for us to better understand the current and evolving nature of cybersecurity threats, existing policies and opportunities and gaps in our respective governments and businesses for cybersecurity, and also opportunities for partnership across the public and private sectors, both within and across our countries and the broader region. So our hope is to explore some of these themes in the morning, and we'd like to continue to do so this afternoon. And our program this afternoon has two parts. It'll begin with remarks from two distinguished speakers, which we're very grateful to have. Director Mochizuki of the Economic Security Policy Division at Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Mr. Raymond Green, the Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. So we'll have remarks from both of them, and then we're going to move into a moderated panel of questions. And so I'll make a plug right now that if you have questions for our in-person or virtual participants, please start thinking about those. And when we get to it, we'll be ready to go. So Director Mochizuki, I turn it over to you for remarks.
Is this working? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think it's working. Thank you. Thank you for giving the floor. Good afternoon to everyone in the room and online as well. I'm really thankful to being invited in this place, surrounded by distinguished speakers, and of course, great thanks to JIIA and CNAS for giving government of Japan to express views on at this precious occasion. So my name is Chihiro Mochizuki. I'm a director in charge of economic security in Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Cyber is not represented in my title, but it doesn't mean that this is less important. It is equally important as economic security. And Ministry of Foreign Affairs is really hardly working on this issue. And today, I just want to briefly touch upon how we frame this cybersecurity issue, which is extremely important under our national security strategy, and also briefly introduce about our effort on cyber diplomacy. So I think I'll get started. And of course, with a focus on the cooperation between Japan and the United States. I'd like to begin by stating that the risk of impeding free access to the cyberspace and its utilization is becoming increasingly serious today. In particular, the threat of cyber attacks, where the risk of exposure is relatively low and the attackers have an advantage, and this is growing rapidly. So this year, I think we need to continue paying attention to the increase in malicious cyber activities, especially those impacting our critical infrastructure, such as healthcare, maritime, aviation, and energy sectors. This includes stealthy, targeted malicious activities for future crises through quietly repositioning on the networks. Furthermore, ransomware continues to be one of the most disruptive cyber threats, disrupting the operations of hospitals and businesses in almost every sector of economies around the world. I must say the scale of this threat is global, and it is unfortunately growing. In Japan, the reported cases of ransomware incidents have increased by 58% from 2021 to 22, for example. We need to fight together against ransomware actors, including through the International Counter-Ransomware Initiative, the CRI, led by the United States, together with more than 50 like-minded states, including Japan, and through other multilateral efforts. I would also like to draw your attention to the need to address challenges posed by the attacks targeting cryptocurrency markets and cryptocurrency theft, like Kotani-san has just indicated at the beginning. North Korea has been exploiting cyberspace for its illicit activities that fund its unlawful weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs. This is an example that shows that the security threats in the physical space and in the cyberspace are interrelated. To ensure secure and stable use of cyberspace, especially the security of nation and critical infrastructures, the National Security Strategy of Japan, formulated in December 2022, indicated that the response capabilities in the field of cybersecurity should be strengthened equal to or even surpassing the level of leading Western countries and introduce new initiatives to this end. These include developing information gathering and analysis capabilities in the field of cybersecurity and establishing systems to implement active cyber defense. Also, reforming government structure so that the government of Japan can conduct cybersecurity policies in more centralized manner. So we are currently working on the preparation of new legislation and the budget to materialize these efforts. I would like now to refer to our cyber diplomacy efforts. Along with enhancing real cyber capabilities that I just outlined, I believe strengthening our efforts in the field of diplomacy is also essential, since it is important to aim to foster trust, reduce threats, and reduce miscalculations to ensure a free, fair, and secure cyberspace. Japan's cyber diplomacy consists of 4 pillars. First, imposing costs on cyber attackers. This includes strengthening information gathering and analysis, as well as attributing and publicly announcing malicious cyber activities to enhance cyber deterrence. Second, promoting the rule of law. This includes deepening discussion on rules and norms to deepen shared international understanding on how existing international law applies to cyber operations, including through the UN. Third, enhancing capacity building efforts to reduce vulnerabilities and security risks of the world. And of course, finally, promoting cyber dialogues with its ally and like-minded countries to advance and strengthen these 3 pillars that I just referred to in a coordinated manner. Allow me to develop a little bit more on each items. On imposing costs on cyber attackers, public attribution in coordination with partner countries, including foreign press secretary statements and technical advisories, will be effective to demonstrate the coalition to set out thresholds, norms and rules, and to impose costs on attackers. It also plays an important role of raising threat awareness domestically and also internationally. In this regard, I'd like to refer to a good example that Japan and the United States jointly issuing a cybersecurity advisory about black tech last year, which is China-linked cyber attacks. We believe it is important to continue this kind of a collaboration among like-minded to ensure more effective cyber deterrence. With regard to promoting the rule of law, Japan actively contributes to the discussions to deepen the understanding of how existing international law applies in cyberspace and to promote the implementation of rules and norms. Japan funded the research at the Oxford University in UK for deepening the discussion on the application of international law to cyber operations targeting the healthcare sector as a part of our efforts. Japan will continue to support the enhancement of capabilities of states to formulate the basic position and to implement existing international law for the pursuit of free, fair, and secure cyberspace. Also, besides the importance of the international law, Japan also contributes to building common recognition and sharing best practices through promoting other standards, such as through joining, it was last month, the joint statement on efforts to counter the proliferation and misuse of commercial spyware led by the United States. Third, regarding enhancing capacity building efforts, cybersecurity cannot be ensured by a single country alone, nor can it be sufficiently ensured by government efforts alone. In this regard, Japan has been conducting capacity building programs, especially in ASEAN region. During last 5 years, Japan has provided training programs for more than 1,600 people at the Japan ASEAN-Japan Cybersecurity Capacity Building Center, the AJCCBC. JICA is also providing various capacity building programs, especially for the Indo-Pacific region. Together with like-minded states, including the United States, Japan is also providing capacity building efforts through the multilateral frameworks such as the World Bank, Cybersecurity Multi-Donor Trust Fund as a top donor. To implement more effective capacity building efforts, we are trying to better understand each country's vulnerabilities and to make cooperation more tangible. Furthermore, Japan conducts various dialogues. Bilateral dialogues provide an opportunity to explain each other's cyber policies and exchange views on threats and issues of concern. We want to be arm in arm with our partners around the world. We continue to aim to foster trust, reduce threats, and promote common understanding on cyber threats and cyber crimes to tackle with them. Finally, on this occasion, I would like to touch upon the latest Japan-U.S. joint statement, which was issued during Prime Minister Kishida's official visit to the United States. It is grateful for both countries to continuously deepen the cooperation on information and cybersecurity, and to plan to enhance cooperation on the protection of critical infrastructure. We also welcome Microsoft's $2.9 billion investment in Japan on AI and cloud infrastructure, workforce training and a research lab, as well as on cybersecurity cooperation with the government of Japan to enhance Japan's cybersecurity resilience. Japan will continue to strengthen our efforts and our cyber diplomacy to realize a free, fair, and secure cyberspace. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Director Mochizuki, for those comprehensive and insightful remarks and for all the work that you're doing to advance cybersecurity cooperation with the United States and cybersecurity policy within Japan. Next, we have remarks from our other distinguished speaker, the Deputy Director of the DCM, of the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, Mr. Green, please.
Great. Thanks so much, Vivek. Let me begin by expressing my appreciation to our hosts, the Center for New American Security and the Japan Institute for International Affairs, for inviting me to participate in today's discussion on cybersecurity and the threats facing the Indo-Pacific region. As Mr. Mochizuki just said, this event is perfectly timed, coming on the heels of the historic visit by Prime Minister Kishida to Washington, D.C. The Prime Minister's visit highlighted the breadth and depth of our bilateral relationship and the strength of our alliance. The visit affirmed our two countries' ambitious efforts to strengthen our alliance in every area, including defense and security, space, advanced technology, economic and energy cooperation, diplomacy and development, and people-to-people ties. But of course, enabling and underpinning all of these efforts is cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is key to realizing our two countries' shared goal of upgrading our respective command and control frameworks to strengthen deterrence. Cybersecurity is necessary to deepen our bilateral defense industrial cooperation and work together towards our shared vision of an integrated air and missile defense architecture in the Indo-Pacific. Cybersecurity is vital to protect the sensitive information we share as we advance cooperation on critical and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, quantum, and semiconductors. Cybersecurity is also essential for protecting our critical infrastructure. Cybersecurity is so critical in all of these areas because the challenges we face in cyberspace are enormous and growing. These threats come from criminal organizations, state actors, and increasingly, a combination of the two working in tandem. They also come in an increasingly potent variety of forms, from traditional malware to ransomware to zero-day exploitation. And the potential for disruptions will only increase as technology advances and there is greater adoption of 5G, AI, and the Internet of Things. We are especially concerned about the focus by our rivals on critical infrastructure in the United States and key partners. Many of you are probably aware of Chinese cyber actor Volt Typhoon's intrusions into U.S. and allied infrastructure. More recently, we have drawn attention to the Russian military intelligence hacking operation known as Sandworm that we believe is responsible for attacks on water utilities in the United States, Poland, and France. We see Japan as a central partner in responding to these threats and to our work to ensure an open, interoperable, reliable, and secure cyberspace. We have been especially impressed with Japan's emphasis on cybersecurity as part of its overall national security strategy, as Director Mochizuki explained so eloquently. Recent passage by the Diet's lower house of private sector security clearance legislation will open up new opportunities to expand our connectivity with the private sector, including enabling the sharing of cyber threat data and facilitating collaboration between government agencies and the private sector to secure vital networks. We see this legislation as complementing the historic Economic Security Promotion Act that was passed in 2022. We hope that Japan's next step is to pass cybersecurity legislation along the lines that Director Mochizuki just discussed. Such legislation would further support information sharing to facilitate research and development of technologies that will strengthen our nation's economic and national security. In our view, legislation that would grant the government the means to conduct active cyber defense, of course with appropriate transparency and oversight, will be essential to further deepening our alliance cooperation on the range of areas the President and the Prime Minister outlined in Washington last week. Going forward, U.S. Japan cooperation will increasingly extend beyond our bilateral alliance. Together, we will help make the Indo-Pacific region more resilient to the heightened threats posed by malicious cyber actors. Leveraging Japan's established reputation as a trusted partner in the region, we are already building partnerships to strengthen the region's capacity, connectivity, and ultimately resilience. Through initiatives such as the ASEAN-Japan Cybersecurity Capacity Building Center, the Japan-EU-US Industrial Control Systems Cybersecurity Week, the U.S. Japan, Taiwan, Australia Global Cooperation and Training Framework, and the annual Pacific Cyber Capacity and Coordination Conference, or P4C, in the Pacific Islands, we are creating a regional network of cybersecurity professionals. We're also building on the success of the historic Camp David Trilateral Summit with South Korea to counter North Korea's illicit cyber activities. But just as cybersecurity is an international responsibility, it is also a responsibility that is shared equally between the public and private sectors. Governments, corporations, and researchers must work together to mitigate cyber risks and vulnerabilities. The private sector mostly owns and operates critical infrastructure assets, making communication between government and private sector invaluable for detecting threats and identifying vulnerabilities. In addition, private sector technical experts offer the ingenuity to develop effective ways to provide secure services while promoting economic growth. In closing, let me just reiterate once again that from the perspective of the U.S.-Japan alliance, cybersecurity, economic security, and national security are all interconnected and equally vital to our work to protect our two countries and to achieve our shared vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific and a global rules-based order. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to Vivek. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Chief of Mission Green and Director Mochizuki for those excellent remarks. It is a great way for us to continue our conversation. And I think the flurry of initiatives and programs that both of you mentioned in your remarks is a testament to the ambitions in both Tokyo and Washington to take the U.S.-Japan alliance to the next level, which will hinge on cybersecurity cooperation, whether it's economic partnership, military partnership, intelligence partnership, private sector partnership. Cybersecurity underlies all of that. So I think both of your comments reflected that well, and I want to thank both of you for making the time to be here. We know you have busy, important jobs, including on this issue, among many other issues, and we're deeply grateful. Next, we're going to turn to our expert panel, and we're fortunate to be joined by three distinguished experts in cybersecurity. We will have about 30 minutes of moderated discussion, followed by around 20 minutes of audience questions. So again, for the people in person and online, and last I checked, we have about 95 people watching online, so I'm grateful to all of them. Please put your card up and let me know that you're interested in asking a question, and then we'll make sure to get you in order. But let me first briefly introduce our three experts. So Professor Takamizawa is currently a visiting professor at the University of Tokyo. Previously, he served in Geneva as the ambassador of Japan to the Conference on Disarmament for 3 years. Before that, he worked as Assistant Chief Cabinet Secretary of the National Security Secretariat and Director General of the National Center for Incident Readiness and Strategy for Cybersecurity. Professor Takamizawa joined the Ministry of Defense after graduating from the University of Tokyo, and at the ministry he's served in several roles, many more than I will list, but they include Director of Defense Policy Division, the Deputy Director of Defense Intelligence Headquarters, and the President of the National Institute of Defense Studies. We also have Mr. Andy Wood, who's the Asia Regional Lead for Defense and Intelligence at Microsoft's Worldwide Public Sector, where he draws on 20 years of senior executive experience spanning banking, professional services, and the public sector to guide governments across Asia to meet the considerable challenges of the digital era and opportunities of the digital era. Andy's an award-winning technology and transformation specialist with an expertise in crafting the strategies required to drive enduring value from adopting digital technologies. And I could go on, but in 2018, Andy was recognized by CIO Australia as one of the top 50 digital leaders in the country. He was also named on the prestigious 40 Under 40 award in Western Australia for his achievements in transforming public sector services. And finally, we're joined by my colleague, Professor Gary Korn, who is the director of the Technology Law and Security Program at American University's Washington College of Law in Washington, D.C., where Professor Korn is an adjunct professor of cyber and national security law and the law of armed conflict. A recognized expert on the intersection of cyber and national security law, Professor Korn joined American University after serving 26 years on active duty in the U.S. Army as a military attorney. His final 5 years in that tenure, he served as the top lawyer to U.S. Cyber Command. So we're very grateful to have all three of these distinguished experts with us this afternoon. And I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I'll start with Professor Korn. I want to actually start with Ukraine, which may not be in the Indo-Pacific region, but is something that the entire world is watching when it comes to cybersecurity. We've seen how Russia has behaved before and after the conflict. What are the lessons for the cyber domain for the United States and for Japan and every other nation in the region as we're watching what Russia's done in Ukraine? And others feel free to chime in as well, but let's start with you, Professor Korn.
Thank you, Vivek. And thank you to both CNAS and JIIA as hosts for asking me to come and join in this workshop and in this discussion. I think there are a number of lessons to be drawn from what we've witnessed in Russia and Ukraine, but principally all things come around full circle. And so early on in the I think the thinking of how cyber presented threats, certainly within military circles, it was viewed as an issue, a component of warfare. But we learned fairly quickly and saw shifts in our policy structure and our legal structure back in the 2018 timeframe that the threat space is not contained to warfare. It spans across the spectrum of peace to war. Russia has demonstrated that. They demonstrated that in the lead up to the conflict in Ukraine, both before 2014 and again in the escalation in 2022. We've also learned, though, that it is a potent component of warfare itself. They've used it. They've gone after critical infrastructure, both energy generation, power generation. They've used it to disrupt communications, gone after satellite capability, a whole array of things that tells us how militaries will think about this and incorporate it in future crises, contingencies, and conflicts. So I think, understanding that threat space more broadly and beginning to organize to deter it, to counter it, and to be prepared through resiliency to deal with the inevitable. You cannot eliminate risk in this space. You cannot completely nullify the possibility that some of these operations will be successful. And that speaks volumes to how you have to build resiliency into your overall operational construct and your strategy so that you can pivot away from any of the negative operations that might happen.
Great. Thanks, Professor Korn. Anyone else want to jump in there? Otherwise, I can keep going. Please, Professor.
Yeah, I think I have 7 points to make in terms of the response to the Ukraine war. war in Ukraine. And there are 7 lessons learned, in my opinion, from the outset of the Ukraine war. The first is the importance of intelligence and information. And second is the importance of infrastructure, including critical information infrastructure. And third is related to improvisation. The nature of the war is changing so rapidly, so we have to be adapting to these new developments. And third is a kind of interaction among the governments and public and private sectors. I think that is really important. I know that the Microsoft has played a great role in this sense. And also, I think integration is important. It is interagency or kind of efforts that we need to make. And we have learned a lot of lessons that how Ukrainian people acted very effectively in this sense. But I think what is really important is the implementation. I think that Japanese government is not really good at implementing what we have agreed on. And so implementation is the key. People know what we need to do, but actually we are not really good at to do it. So I think the most important lesson learned from the war in Ukraine is the kind of the willingness to implement what is really needed, even though it costs a lot and it is not easy to implement. And also consensus making within the domestic political system is hard. So I think what Japan is facing now is that we need to really implement these lessons into practice. Thank you.
That's terrific. Thanks, Professor Takamizawa. Improvisation, integration, implementation. That's certainly something that it's easy to write policies and strategies. It's harder to actually make them real. We've seen that certainly in our country. Andy, I wanted to actually jump in since Microsoft was named, and feel free to add anything to that first question. But, Microsoft is both a company that is very prominent in terms of its cybersecurity engagement with governments and businesses, not only in Japan, but around the world, but also is a leading player globally in AI, in the age of generative AI. And there's a ton of interest, not just in the cybersecurity context, but just generally in what is going to happen with generative AI in a variety of sectors. Cybersecurity is certainly not immune to that. How do you think that generative AI, from Microsoft's perspective, is going to change the balance between cyber offense and cyber defense? Many people obviously worry that we're going to, see a world of AI-generated malware and phishing, but give us a sense from your perspective of how that looks.
Thanks for that. It already has changed, and it's changed in a way that there's no going back. The genie is out of the bottle. I think everybody kind of needs to accept that as a first step. From my perspective, there's 2 sort of key things which keep me awake at night when it comes to sort of Gen AI in the realm of cyber. One is the ever-increasing gap between the rate of change in this innovative technology and governments of all persuasions' inability to legislate and regulate effectively and keep pace with that. And that's creating a pretty challenging environment at the moment. And the second thing, we sort of is part of the underlying part of this Gen AI transformation, is the fact that threat actors are already using it at machine speed. And so there is a necessity for cyber defenders and threat hunters to also react at machine speed. But as you sort of dive down a little bit further into, these are all being built off large language models effectively. And that's actually presenting a number of new and emerging risks that I don't think have been properly understood or assessed more broadly. And I'll kind of elaborate on a few of them. There's about 7 sort of that the team and I have sort of thought over recently. One is the prompt injection attacks. So asking the model to provide answers that they're not usually designed to respond, and trying to do pre-prompt jailbreaking or ASCII attacks. Second is around training data extraction. So using those same techniques to elicit copyright and company IP materials from the models. Backdoor access, the third. So attacks across the infrastructure layer, from the dev environment to token generation and interception. You've then also got adversarial attacks. So using techniques to hide or trick the model. So things like with vision models, using printed jumpers to fool the results and sort of give incorrect answers. You then got data poisoning. So embedded data within the training sets. It can make the results hiding in plain sight and produce nefarious results. or even going further into data file extraction. So using those same prompting and other techniques to extract data from known references and databases, knowledge graphs in retrieval or augmentation generation models. And those integrations that otherwise wouldn't have access, including extracting whole documents. And then you've got your sleeper agent attacks. So which can be embedded in the training data in the critical execution of the output. So for example, a code prompt which outputs nefarious code and a activation tool for system execution. Now, of those, 3 of them would be considered more traditional cybersecurity challenges, and traditional approaches that we are known and proven can provide some cyber assurance, so long as there is good diligence and good systems and architecture management, and those being in place is absolutely critical. But the rest are actually considered next generation attacks, and they're all emerging, and they would require actually new techniques and systems and processes to mitigate them. And so just to elaborate on that, some of those approaches and things to be considered would be looking at the underlying model creators, which are critical in the underlying data quality, which is so important. Because right now, there are over 1 million large language models currently available in the open source community on Hugging Face. Many of those are from startups with unknown data and model provenance. So selecting a provider that is trusted, tested, validated, has exceptional safety and governance alignment is extremely critical. The other one themselves is acknowledgement that the model themselves can't actually be used effectively. There needs to be a lot of secure infrastructure that's wrapped around them to be able to serve up in the APIs. And so the providers of that infrastructure in terms of cybersecurity, physical security, they need to be trusted. Third is good access control on the tooling, the database integration, knowledge graph integration. These access controls need to go beyond role-based access controls to structured data, covering things of attribute-based access controls to ensure that each data type has stringent controls over access and cannot be extracted via the LLM. And finally, it's an evolving landscape. So as such, AI providers need to have the scale, security focus, and systems and processes to address these emerging threats as they evolve. Smaller providers, given the scale of AI systems, typically will not have the ability to respond at machine speed to such challenging threats quickly and effectively. This is where it's critical that industry, research organizations, and government work together to make sure that the effective regulation and processes and systems are in place to capture that. We're in a technology evolutional step change. There are emerging threats, and having those partnership approaches with core technology providers and industry is absolutely critical to stay ahead of those threats and capture the value that this new technology can actually bring whilst ensuring we remain safe and secure.
Great. Thanks, Andy. If I could just follow up, well, we in our presentation earlier and the workshop that we had earlier today, we talked, there was a mention that about 80% in Japan of reported attacks are phishing, right? And this is not highly sophisticated state actors, although it can be at times. It's often just individuals or criminal groups trying to get you to click on something that you shouldn't, and how generative AI, people have speculated, will make these tools far more convincing and easier to click on. But one thing I'm trying to wrap my head around is, when we think about, that's the cyber offensive threat, right? How AI is making it easier for sort of your casual fisher, cyber fisher, to perpetrate attacks. But will those victims or targets be the beneficiaries of the AI-powered cyber defenses? Because when we think of AI-enabled cyber defenses, we think of those with access to enterprise-level, cloud-based solutions. But my aunt who's clicking on things she shouldn't be clicking on doesn't have access to those. So how worried should we be about that? And how do you think we can make AI-enabled tools for cyber defense more broadly available?
That is a great question. And probably a couple of points. Firstly, there's a common misconception broadly across the community that when you think about threat actors and offensive criminals, that they're these highly trained, sophisticated people working in the most high-tech labs. And the reality is a lot of them are 15, 16-year-olds who've been given 2 hours training and a $30 prepaid Visa card to go get some ransomware and malware off dark web and then have at it. So being able to then leverage Gen AI tools to then increase the speed of that, it's a numbers game, it's a tidal wave. Now, pivoting to then the other point around what I would describe as those being left behind, right? So think about your small, medium corporations, small business, individuals. They are at huge risk. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and ensure that whatever effective and good governance and legislation and policy frameworks are put in place, it creates a system that offers that level of protection. And particularly looking at industry providers like Microsoft to work with our partners who are then developing on our platforms and leveraging things like Azure OpenAI services to build and integrate into their own products and systems to provide that safety net and coverage.
Great, thanks for that, Andy. We often talk about the digital divide, but I think one thing that could be emerging is sort of the cybersecurity divide if we're not proactive about making tools available. Professor Takamizawa, I was hoping to ask you the next question. What do you know, this actually came from one of our online participants, but I'm going to summarize what they wrote, but they said Japan needs reporting requirements for a cyber attack. Not all companies that have been attacked report it out of fear. Small and medium-sized businesses are lagging in the preparation against cyber attacks. What would a good reporting requirement for Japan look like, and what do you think the barriers might be?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. But I think what is most important is to understand the significance of cybersecurity on their business or business continuity or development of the business. So I think even reporting is seen as a kind of humiliation or kind of something to not to disclose to even to the cybersecurity agency. So I think that there are three measures I think to be taken in the at the outset. I think first is related to the knowledge, raise the knowledge base for cyber threats. And second is how good it is to have a resilient cybersecurity, I think, framework. And thirdly, I think that the people understand that there is a help if you ask. So I think in local communities, that police agencies and other organizations are really helpful if information sharing is made. So I think that is a kind of area. And finally, I think that the March 18th is a cybersecurity day in Japan. So I think that we have to be asking the people to compete with the cyber reporting contest. So that this kind of reporting will make the government help you or something. So this is a kind of just an idea. Thank you.
We're going to have to think about what people win if they win the reporting contest. Thank you for that. Professor Korn, the next question I wanted to ask you, you were at U.S. Cyber Command at a historic time for the organization where, they were shifting towards a concept called active defense. And I was hoping you could provide our audience in person and online a little bit more context about what it means to make that shift to so-called active defense, and what were the lessons that the United States drew, what pushed the United States to make that shift? What have we learned since we've made it? And are there any implications for Japan as they consider their own cyber posture?
Sure. Prior to 2018, the legal and policy structure in the United States was significantly different, I would say, and at a national policy level, there was a notion of restraint. Like that, the approach was one of restraint, with the premise that would be setting an example that would restrain others from engaging in malicious cyber behavior and activity. And I think just observing the environment, collecting the data, seeing what was going on, there was a recognition that it had the opposite effect, that there was lack of consequence for bad actors. And so we've all seen the discussions about the numbers, both in terms of real dollars and economics and the numbers of cyber hacks and negative operations that have happened. Those were exponentially increasing over time. Number one. Number two, and as I alluded to earlier, this is primarily happening outside of situations of armed conflict. the normal use of cyber now as a tool of statecraft, even hostile statecraft, is happening in the proverbial gray zone or outside of situations of warfare. And so both from a policy and a legal perspective, there was a need to reorganize to address that threat space. That was what the driver was. It's all about, as General Nakasone used to say, we cannot be episodic in our response to these problems. We have to be consistent, vigilant, and proactive. What he defines and refers to as persistent engagement, which is really sort of a philosophy for driving the entire enterprise on a consistent basis, both in terms of research and development, in terms of building capability and capacity, in terms of partnerships, in terms of the intelligence understanding of what's happening in the space, and then ultimately, potentially, when authorized, taking active disruption activities, which we refer to and was introduced in the 2018 Department of Defense cyber strategy of defend forward. This is a notion of really just, I would say, counter cyber operations that recognize, as we've recognized in some other domains over time, that we have to actually disrupt malicious activity closer to its source, if not at its source, and not simply deal with this through firewalls and internal security, endpoint device security, et cetera, because at that point, it's often too late, right? And now you're in a mitigation phase. So, all those factors drove this significant shift. And as I said, it wasn't just a policy change. There were some critical pieces of legislation that followed with that and enabled a more proactive stance for the nation and for the command.
Great. Thanks, Professor Korn. And Professor Takamizawa, I might ask you a follow-up on that question, which is, Japan is considering its own shift towards a more active cyber posture, but obviously is confronting constitutional and legal questions about how far it can go, given, post-war constitutional constraints on how offensive Japan can get in any domain, let alone the cyber domain. So I was hoping maybe you could speak a little bit about how the Diet and the Kishida administration are trying to navigate that as they try to modernize their cyber posture while being true to constitutional limitations. Easy question.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to speak in Japanese if it's okay with you. Yeah.
First of all, about the active cyber defense and cybersecurity related issues. First, I'd like to point out the fact that so far, conventionally in the cyberspace, for Japan, information gathering capability and the structure was established in what way compared to other countries. And I would say that there was a major difference between Japan and other countries in terms of the information gathering structure or system. Then second point is about technology. That is, in other countries or elsewhere, the technology development for cybersecurity related activities have been going on, but in Japan, we have limited experiences, and therefore, when it comes to technology as well, we have to say that Japan is faced with the numerous challenges. And then on top of that, why Japan has been operating in such a way, that is because fundamentally, that is due to the interpretation of the Constitution and the way the laws and regulations are implemented. There was a very strong reluctance in doing those activities. However, in 2022, in December, the strategy document was issued, which states the consideration and investigation onto those questions. And right now, preparation is quite actively being undertaken. Therefore, I would say there are three important points. First, according to the strategy, there are three areas that we need to confirm, and for that, we need a legal infrastructure, a legal base that would enable us to do that. Second, to operationalize that, staff, the human resources, as well as technology and organization have to be developed and established. In summer, there will be revision of NISC, NISC, and with that, I would say that now so to speak, the engine is replaced, and therefore I want to see that the basic, the legal base be developed as soon as possible. And third point, the cooperation with the like-minded countries, including the United States. And in this respect, personally, I consider that in Five Eyes, together with New Zealand and Canada, with Australia, UK, and the United States, whether those two countries have the comparable technology level or capability, they unfortunately no. And no is the level of the precision. And those are the areas where we need to make an improvement steadily. Sorry for monopolizing the microphone too long, but that's all.
Oh, Hartley, thank you for that comprehensive answer. I asked a complicated question. You deserve a little bit of time to provide a nuance and substantial answer, which you did, and I appreciate it. My next question is back to Andy. When we think about the work that Microsoft does with governments and the private sector around the world, not just in Japan, a key dimension of it is protecting critical infrastructure. And, I guess it also begs the question of different governments define critical infrastructure in different ways. Are we talking about key military and national security systems, or, water systems that are managed with a local manager that has a password of 1111? I think there was a case of an Iranian group that actually hacked some American water systems using literally that password, which is just very basic. But Andy, when you're looking at it, Microsoft's work globally, and I guess for Japan specifically, what do you see as steps that operators of critical infrastructure can take to harden their security?
Ooh, a lot. However, it's the thing with emerging threats and emerging innovation and emerging technology, particularly when you're looking at trying to improve your security posturing or adapt and integrate a new technology into your own business. That, for me, when I talk to customers, my first question is why? What is it that you hope to achieve? What's the impact on your organization going to be, your people, your processes? How are you going to change the way in which you operate on the basis of accepting this new technology? Because if you're going to keep doing things the same way you've always done them, but just put something in, you're not going to get the result. So it's not going to tackle it. So I suppose in summary, my first point is be open to doing things differently because you're facing different threats. The second is they're going to need to work more broadly with government, with industry, because it's not a challenge that can be solved just on their own. And so, acknowledging that one party doesn't have all the answers, I think is also absolutely critical. And the third is treat it with the level of urgency that is actually required to face the threat as it is today and will be in the future, because it's not going away. It's getting worse, which means you need to train your people. You need to invest in your defenses. You need to ensure that you have good governance, and you need to constantly review that in light of new and continued emerging threats.
And just to follow up on that, Andy, it feels like, getting back to the sort of cyber gaps, it feels, it's one thing to ask well-resourced, sophisticated national security agencies to develop robust cybersecurity policies, but when you're dealing with, a rural hospital in Western Australia or in the rural areas of Japan or the United States, if they become a target of state-based cyber activities, it just feels like there's always going to be a massive gap in terms of their capabilities and their target. I mean, how do we possibly harden, given the breadth of potential cyber attacks, cyber targets that are out there in critical infrastructure? What sort of risk do we need to live with? And how do we raise the floor for cybersecurity for some of the less resourced, less sophisticated, but still important potential targets?
So I think
Another easy question for you.
oh yeah, absolutely. Accepting the risk that the threat's probably already there, it's in there, and it's not going away. So work on the basis that it is when, not if. Secondly, and at the risk of sort of being a little too pro hyperscale here, is work with those that do this best. I see across multiple industries, senior people acknowledging the need to do something, and then say, well, but I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to build my own unique solution. For me, that's absolute madness, because when you've got the likes of Microsoft or Google or any other hyperscale provider who are investing billions of dollars every single year, have active workforces, in the Microsoft's case, it's near on 10,000 cyber professionals working in a follow the sun model globally, identifying threats, improving our systems processes, leverage what's already there. And I guess that comes back to the message of work with industry, because nobody can do it on their own.
Thanks, Andy. Professor Korn, I was going to kick it to you, unless you have a follow-up on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this is a reflection of the need for a culture shift. This is the cultural mindset is generally that, while there are tech companies, there's everybody else. And for everybody else, tech is a cost center. And it's, a risk problem in terms of sharing and cooperating. And if I have a problem, I need to contain that and focus solely on my fiduciary responsibilities to customer base, et cetera. That has to be changed. Everything is a tech company today because everything's driven by some level of technology. And if you're not treating this as an ongoing operational concern for your business, you're exposing your business. Number one. Number two, and I've seen this in play in TTXs and otherwise, the soda straw approach to thinking about this misses the mark. What's happening in your network may, at that micro level, be something that you can mitigate and contain, but you don't realize that that's fitting into a much bigger puzzle of what's happening out there. And that cooperation with the government becomes critical to understanding the broader sight picture of the threat space and what's happening. But, I think there's a huge education process that has to happen. It's happening at some level, but to change the cultural paradigm of how the private sector approaches this problem.
Thanks, Professor Korn. I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative to ask you another question before we kick it to broader questions from the audience. So people should get teed up for that if you have any questions. One thing that, Professor Korn and my CNAS colleagues were in Taipei earlier this week, and something that came up constantly in our conversations in Taipei, but hasn't come up as much in our meetings in Japan and in our events in Japan, is information operations and influence operations and disinformation. Obviously, Taiwan is ground zero for that, coming from Beijing. But often there is a conversation about cybersecurity over here and securing the physical networks and the cyber domain. That takes place among a certain set of professionals. And then there was a conversation about the information space and information operations that happens over here. And Professor Korn, you and I have talked before about how it's a mistake to think about them differently. I was hoping you could maybe elaborate on that, and maybe for people who aren't paying attention to this as closely as you are, give people a sense of how these pieces fit together for people who are seeking to use these tools for nefarious ends.
Yeah, I think, for some time now, our primary adversaries have not looked at these as separate capabilities. It's an integrated approach to cyber and information operations. And, that makes tremendous sense because the information world has almost entirely moved from analog to digital. So influence operations, suasion, dissuasion, persuasion, this is not new. States have engaged in this behavior for centuries. What's new is the scope, scale, depth, and speed at which these operations happen and the effect they can generate. And so, yes, I think certainly in the U.S. and other examples, we've tended to separate those. We've thought about the space of disruptive actions impacting the compute functionality of systems and so on, and thought about how we architect to deal with that problem. And we've forgotten about the information space, which is simply using this technology as it's designed to influence at speed and scale. And that has to be integrated into, I think, your thinking about strategies, et cetera. Now, if we recognize, as has been discussed, the legal complexities of cybersecurity in the traditional sense of the term, that gets exponentially harder when you start talking about managing the information space itself. There are huge hurdles and challenges to have to tackle, but you know, my children get tired of hearing me say this: never confuse difficulty with impossibility. Right? They're not synonyms. And so they're challenges, but they have to be addressed.
Great. Thank you, Professor Korn. I'm going to put that on a poster above my bed. I can look at every morning. Thank you for that. Now we'll move to questions from the audience. If there are people, start putting your cards up if you have any. I have one question from a virtual participant here that I can start with. So this is for anybody who dares take it. This question is about, this is from Masahiro Taniguchi, and they ask about the threat of cyber attacks on space assets and communications, and what are the possible precautions and countermeasures against such a hybrid cross-domain threat. Does anybody want to take that? Any thoughts? Good.
I'll say that it's a very, very real concern. I'll defer to the cybersecurity technical experts more, but it's back to the same sort of thinking about how you're managing your digital infrastructure, et cetera. But you can't separate space operations from cyber connectivity and activity. And just think of the disruptive effect you can achieve by disabling satellite communications, overhead surveillance, all sorts of things that we are dependent on now, just global positioning, et cetera. It is definitely a real risk, and something that militaries, I'd say, across the board, and certainly our adversaries, are looking at in their planning.
I'll just add a short statement onto that. We're already seeing it occur. It's already happening. So you think about, you talk about the different domains. This is an issue across all 5 domains, the traditional ones, including space. As I said, the threat problem and the landscape is ever increasing. People really need to sort of understand that it is not going to shrink, it is increasing. So it is absolutely critical that every single one of those assets, critical infrastructure, including satellite communication, traditional communications, undersea, subsea cables, it is all protected to the highest level possible.
Professor Takamizawa, please.
Yeah, one thing, I think that this is a kind of built-in vulnerability, and we cannot escape from them. And hosted payload concept, I think, is not valid, or no longer valid now, because we have seen so many taboo-breaking actions during the war in Ukraine.
Thank you. The next question is for you as well, Professor Takamizawa. There was a reference, this is from an online participant, there was a reference to the U.S. Japan joint statement, but the geographical scope of cyber is unclear. The U.S. Japan command relationship covers the Indo-Pacific region, but to what extent is Japan involved? If we get bogged down, if Japan gets bogged down in cyber, won't there be no limits to what we can do?
Yes, it's true that cyberspace is borderless. So when it constitutes the armed attack against Japan from anywhere, I think the geographical, I think, point doesn't matter at all. So the question is whether or not Japan is attacked or kind of threatened or influenced. Yeah, that is my interpretation.
Anyone else want to take that? If not, we have another question online. This one I'm going to ask to either Andy or Professor Korn. Is distributed storage, such as IPFS, and for people who don't know what that is, it's the Interplanetary File System, which is an alternative to HTTP or HTTPS. Is that effective in cybersecurity? Do either of you want to take this on?
I may have falsely given the impression I'm actually a technical expert. Question of effectiveness, typically good defense, and I'm sure my peer to the right here who has actually served doesn't rely on one particular thing. It's integrated, it spans multiple domains, it uses every single tool in your kit bag, so to speak. So from a technical perspective, to answer the question specifically, I don't know, but I would caution not relying on it. I would basically use every single available advantage you possibly can in your cyber defenses.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a lawyer, not a technologist, so less technically capable than you, but I would say a single point of failure leads to failure. I mean, it's somewhat that simple. And, you know, it is a principle of like military communications that you establish redundancy of communications, because you have to presume that some systems will get disrupted. And I think that is certainly the case, you know, from cyber security and defense perspective, that if you begin to develop monoculture or rely on a single, you know, system or capability, you're increasing your risk.
Great, thanks. A question that I wanted to ask you, Professor Korn, was thinking a little bit about how, and Andy, feel free to jump in here too. We've hinted at it, but not said it explicitly. How has Beijing's approach to the cyber domain shifted over time? I know Microsoft has written on this and analyzed this. Maybe you can just describe to us any evolution that you've seen and what are the implications for our own policy?
I think the evolution that we've seen, which presumes that we've had good insight and you know what we're seeing over time, but certainly when I first started getting involved in this space, the discussions were that Russia was louder and more aggressive. China was quieter and focused more on espionage, right, industrial and otherwise. That has shifted. I think they've watched and taken lessons from Russia and other situations. And as we've seen now with what we would call operational preparation of the environment, the Volt Typhoon scenario, et cetera, that they are positioning in critical infrastructure, et cetera, things that if they needed to, they could generate impact against, to be disruptive, to impede deployment of military force, to introduce friction in decision-making, and buy time and space for their operations. So I think that has been a steady and observable shift. And the other is we certainly started to see around COVID, where there was information operations, disinformation, et cetera, to address the COVID situation, and that they've built upon that. And I think one of the things that was pretty stark coming from Taiwan was, you know, on the heels of their election and their experience, the level of information operations that China has engaged in, certainly directed at Taiwan, but more broadly. So these are all, I think, strategic and operational shifts that they won't reverse course on. They'll only build on this.
Look, I think from Microsoft's perspective, based on the visibility of what we can actually see occurring over, you know, our entire global footprint, we know that, you know, we can identify certain activities that are originating as nation-state attacks out of China, and based on the number, the ferocity, we know that they are Gen AI backed and enabled, and we estimate that, you know, and again, this is just an estimate, their cyber force is probably sitting at around 150,000, if not more. Again, I don't see that decreasing. I see it sort of increasing. And like Professor Korn, this goes beyond traditional cybersecurity. It very much is in the disinformation, misinformation space, and we see it over multiple channels, including social media, through Line, WeChat, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, the works. So when you think about just the breadth of what's going out there, it really strikes home just the level of threat that we face and the onerous task ahead to actually mitigate and stay ahead and have that advantage. Those words you say to your children are now going to resonate with me because that is exactly what we face.
Yeah, difficult but not impossible. That's good. Professor Takamizawa, unless I see any questions from the audience, I may conclude with a question, which is, in our conversation earlier today, we learned a lot, and even from the remarks from DCM Green and the distinguished speaker from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that there's a lot of initiatives from the U.S. and Japan. There's aspirations to train thousands of cyber warriors to protect Japan's cyber domain. When you look out at all of this activity, what gives you hope? What gives you a sense that Japan is on the right track? What makes you worried where you feel like Japan is on the wrong track? And, are there things that Japan is doing you think could be an example to the United States and to other countries in the region that are dealing with common cyber threats?
Thank you. First of all, that with regard to China, I have the experience that we are looking at the past Chinese strategy and so forth. Maybe we might be 2 or 3 years behind what China is doing right now. So maybe we have to be very careful about what we are witnessing now. And with regard to the Japan-US cooperation, I think what is really important is to know the differences we have, not the common elements that we have. So we tend to believe in what we have in common, but which is not always true. So I think we have to conduct a real, very near real a simulation exercise on cyberspace and cybersecurity in the context of a much more difficult, I think, simultaneous crisis in Japan. So both understanding the basics as well as focusing on the most challenging scenario. This will be the key to strengthen the alliance and so forth. And also beyond US and beyond private sectors, beyond the interagency coordination and so forth. And the cyberspace is really a challenging area, but we live in cyberspace. So this is the most urgent and a very good target for Japan to make our mindset change for the better. So we are living in a kind of semi-wartime, and what is happening, and what we know is, I think that Japan doesn't know what Japan doesn't know. So this is a very challenging situation, but I think there is hope that we have a kind of united front, and also we have a lot of room to improve our capability in a sense that we have potential, but that hasn't been utilized fully by us all. So that is kind of not answering to your question, but what I'd like to emphasize here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor. I think drawing from all of the comments in this session, we realize that there are rapidly changing threats and opportunities in the cyber domain. We have multiple actors within government, across governments, and across the private sector, and not a lot of time to figure out all of these questions as the technologies change almost every week, it seems. And that isn't to suggest we should give up hope. It just is to suggest that we need to work even harder and be even more creative and disciplined and collaborative in how we're thinking across governments and businesses to meet the challenges of cyber threats in the 21st century. And again, to make sure that we aren't being defined by the threat, but defined by our ambition and our aspirations for cooperation. So I hope everybody will join me in thanking our 3 expert panelists for this session. And then I will kick it over to my colleague. Why don't we do a round of applause for our three panelists? I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Now, that concludes the panel portion of our event, and now I'm going to turn it over for some concluding remarks first to my colleague, Jacob Stokes, who's the Senior Fellow on our Indo-Pacific Security Program at CNAS.
Well, thank you, Vivek. Good afternoon to everyone. This has just been a very fascinating discussion, and I think we leave here today much more knowledgeable about cybersecurity issues than we were when we arrived. But we also leave much more clear-eyed about the challenges we face and the vital importance of deepening cooperation within the U.S. Japan alliance with like-minded partners to meet challenges across the cyber domain. We also have a chance to seize new opportunities offered by artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies with both civilian and defense applications. And we know for a fact that our authoritarian competitors, particularly China, are working very hard to get there first. Over the course of the day, we've identified opportunities to learn from each other's experiences, to work together more closely on a bilateral basis, and to join with other like-minded countries to improve the cybersecurity landscape around the world. If we act wisely and we have enough resolve, we can make the cyber domain more safe and secure, while also ensuring it remains dynamic, innovative, and supportive of democracy. So in short, we've got a very full agenda for the future and lots of work to do. On behalf of the CNAS team, I'd like to say thank you to Director Mochizuki and Deputy Chief of Mission Green for their insightful official remarks. I also wanted to extend our appreciation to the speakers, Professor Takamizawa, Gary, Andy, for providing us with such a rich conversation, expertly moderated by Vivek. And I also wanted to say a hearty thanks to our colleagues and friends at the Japan Institute of International Affairs, including Chief Executive Yoshida and Kotani-san for collaborating with us to put on this event. We truly value the partnership between our two organizations and sincerely hope to continue it well into the future. Finally, thank you to the CNAS's corporate partners at Microsoft for supporting our work in these critical areas. Thanks again, everyone, and let me turn it back to Kotani-san.
はい、これで本日のワークショップを終えた
So
い。
this concludes the workshop. First of all, I would like to, on behalf of the JIIA, thank CNAS, who is a co-sponsor, that is Jake-san and Vivek-san and others, and also our thanks to the panelists, and also our thanks to everyone who is here on site and joining us online for their participation. The issue of cybersecurity or information security requires cooperation between the industry, academia, and government. It also requires international collaboration, and that's, I think, taken for granted. Therefore, we would like to, through activities such as these, contribute to creating a structure to better respond to cybersecurity threats. And this plan actually was organized before Prime Minister Kishida's visit to the United States, but I think it turned out that we were able to follow up on the Japan-US summit meeting, so it was a pleasant surprise. And the JIIA is constantly soliciting individual as well as corporate members. So those of you who have not become members, please do check out our homepage. So with this, I would like to conclude the webinar on cybersecurity in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you so very much for your participation today.